Half-a-day students, I am Governor Lou Leon Guerrero. You all have been through a year of big changes. We've had to adapt and make big changes to keep our families and our island safe. But with change comes opportunity and a chance to try new things like PBS University. While Lieutenant Governor Josh Tenorio and I will continue to do our part to keep our island safe, you students have a part to play as well. Your part is to keep learning and to keep up with your lessons. That's why I am happy to see you here ready to learn with PBS University. PBS University is a way to bring a continuous educational curriculum to you while you stay safe at home during this time. To help you keep up with your studies, we asked our friends at PBS Guam and the Guam Department of Education to put together this episode. Thank you for doing your part and have a great lesson.
Humanities Guåhan, an independent nonprofit organization affiliated with the National Endowment for the Humanities, is dedicated to promoting public humanities programming for the people of Guam and providing foundational support and educational resources for our island community. For more information about Humanities Guåhan, visit www.humanitiesguahan.org. The following webinar series is part of a project presented by Humanities Guåhan entitled Unincorporated, Voting, Voices, and Visions Para Guåhan. This project explores CHamoru stories, experiences, and perspectives on civic engagement in relation to voting rights, democracy, political status, and CHamoru self-determination. Unincorporated consisted of the 5-part webinar series that took place from January through May 2021 and covered topics on the origins of CHamoru self-determination, the work of the Commission on Decolonization, the relationship between art and decolonization, and the role of the U.S. legal system as it relates to Guam's political status. The project culminated with the launch of an online and printed magazine distributed throughout the community, which consists of essays, creative reflections, and artwork exploring issues around Guåhan's political status and decolonization through the perspectives and historical and political experiences of the CHamoru people of Guåhan.
I think the reality is this, is that unfortunately for us, we are one people. We're an island chain like Hawaii, right? I mean, we're a chain of islands with the same culture, ethnicity. You know, we were together, but politically now, through our own choosing, politically we are divided. You know, and the reality is that, you know, war came between us, and, you know, political power came between us, and the CNMI went one way and we went another. And so it's, you know, in that way now we each have our own political challenges in terms of status that we need to resolve. And then we need to have, or even concurrently, we need to have other conversations about reunification, whether we want that and what that means. You know, now is actually a really, I think, a very important time to start to revisit these conversations and really, you know, push more energy and enthusiasm into them, because the CNMI is, you know, everybody in our region wants to renegotiate their compact. You know, I think that it's clear. I think our neighbors have, you know, clearly seen that their compacts, as much as they have changed things, that they understand now that there is a better way, that they can have a more equitable relationship. You know, and I think that that's something that's important for us as well, because, you know, we went down the Commonwealth path because we saw our neighbors in the CNMI making waves and doing, you know, great things, getting these high level negotiations and a lot of this attention from the federal government. And we thought, wow, why can't we have the same? And so, and because they had attained that, they executed their compact, they were able to achieve their political status. We thought that why not? Why can't we do the same? But I think now we also, as much as we would have liked that to have been resolved back then, I guess the silver lining is that we see now how Commonwealth worked out. There's still a lot of
Speaking
people
of,
out there that we can still do that, right? Commonwealth is not dead. Like if we really wanted to, we can, go back in there. Congress still allowing us to write Constitution. We can start doing all of these things to prepare for Commonwealth. And yeah, sure, why not? You could, but I think it's clear that these things are very out of place. And we've, our people have been very intelligent and very strategic along the way. We have interjected and fought and resisted at very appropriate places, in ways that weren't always seen in a positive light. There are a lot of people at that time who thought that OPIR were disruptors. My grandfather may have been one of those people who thought that. My grandfather was very much an advocate for statehood, and very much an advocate for a closer relationship to, with the federal government. And I think that was, I think that we've all learned things along the way. We've experienced things along the way that have really shaped how we approach this discussion and how we approach this issue. And and I'm personally very proud of our government. Learning our history, it's been one of the nice things about taking up this gig is that I thought that I understood this. I thought that I was educated. And every day I learn more and more and more. Somebody just dropped a document on my desk from former Senator Jim Underwood that has a bunch of mapped out milestones throughout our history. And it's such a great read for me. It's such a nice thing to see all of this strategic approach throughout our history, and to see how intelligent, how forward thinking our people have been along the way. And yeah, we've taken a long time to resolve it. We're still, who knows if the end is in sight. But what I appreciate is the way that we continue to evolve, because this is so complex, and no non-self-governing territory is the same, no colony is the same, no colonizer is the same. Well, maybe the colonizers.
yeah, I was gonna say. Hey, I got another question though. I've got a question that came in from Dr. Lisa Linda Natividad. She wanted to know if are there any formal bilateral efforts between Guåhan and the CNMI to discuss the possibility of reunification that you know of?
I'm sorry, it's cutting out. Can you say one more time?
Are there any formal bilateral efforts between Guam?
Formal bilateral efforts between us and the CNMI? Not currently, but I think that it's, like I said, I think this is a great opportunity for this type of discussion, this type of motion. I don't, we have a lot of, nothing very formal, I would say, but we have a lot of connections still to our neighbors. And that's one of the things that I think is very encouraging, is that even in small ways that may seem insignificant, like we have an agricultural trade going on right now between our islands, which seems small, but at the core of it, this is what makes us us. This now is reaching back into our ancestral roots, our way. We're feeding each other. This is a very important step, in my opinion, in reestablishing this connection, this love between us, because let's face it, there's a lot of hurt between us. It still exists. Even our kids who are long separated from it, they still feel that animosity from their parents, grandparents. They understand that it's real. And so we have to be deliberate about the healing. And I think that that's the important thing, is that we are, even though there are no very formal bilateral agreements between our governments, I think that we have agreed to ally politically, but these small connections that we have been deliberately making throughout the years, I think is what is important and what will get us to that place.
We have the conversations going. So I think that's important. Thanks, Melvin. We'll go ahead and allow you to move on to your next segment of the presentation. And we do have a couple of questions that I think will apply to the next parts of your question or of your presentation, though. So I'll get to those questions as soon as we do. Go ahead.
Okay. So as much as the Commission on Decolonization legislation really was, a very thoughtful process, very much a product of our action and reflection. We will always run into resistance. We will always run into an obstacle. The Davis versus Guam case is probably the biggest, most popularized obstacle, most formidable obstacle in recent time. So Dave Davis is a retired airman. He is, I'm not sure where Dave Davis is from somewhere in the continental US. Moved to Guam, resided in Guam for a number of years, was denied access to the registry, the political status registry, for the plebiscite, for our self-determination plebiscite. He asserted that his 14th and 15th amendments were violated, and that this was basically that we were discriminating against him based on race and ethnicity. And so he took us to court. We lost on the we went up to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. At that point, we were ruled against, but it's not as plain and simple, I think, as a judge says these guys are right versus these guys. What I think we learned from the court ruling was that, well, first of all, I should say what we learned is that Julian Uggin is a monster in the courtroom, and he was a very formidable opponent. Julian Uggin did right by us, and he fought valiantly. The attorney or the judge actually was very, very clear in her ruling, in her briefing, that the arguments that Julian presented were actually very substantial. But it was so close. It was so close that it was difficult. Traditionally, if you look at the history of the way that these judges rule, when it's that close on a constitutional rights issue, they will always kind of err on the side of caution, so to speak. Which is ironic when, in terms of constitutional rights, that when it's that close to err on the side of caution, when we have the territorial clause that blatantly decides, which rights apply to citizens of Guam and which ones don't. So what we saw is that we were not far off. Like, yeah, we lost in the case, but we were not very far off. And it were really minor things in our law that swayed the judge, that kind of kept her hands tied and made it difficult for her to rule on our side. And a lot of it was that, on one side, Julian argued that this is a non-binding plebiscite. And so, what's the deal? It's really, this is really for us to determine what we want. It's not about anyone else. And it's clear who the colonized people are here. It's clear that decolonization is to address the colonized people. It's clear that self-determination is an act that you make once. It's an exercise that you do once. And so for us, right, and this is kind of the way that I look at it is, let's say that I move to California and I decide that I want to vote for president, right? I want to be a real American. So I'm going to register in California, and now I get to vote for my rep. You know, I'm represented. I'm a part of a representative democracy now on a full level, right? Full scale. Got my representation in the Senate, in Congress. I got my electoral college votes. I have then just self-determined as an individual. I made that choice for myself. I've resolved my political issue because now I've availed myself of full voting rights, right? In our law, I am now ineligible to vote in the Guam plebiscite, right? And it's not just because, and that was put in there deliberately, right? That we have to be a registered voter on Guam. So, but if I move to California and I live in California, but I still vote in Guam, I'm still a resident of Guam, I vote absentee, you know, then I'm still considered a part of it, right? Now, in the same way, right, Dave Davis, for example, since he wanted to be the example, by moving to Guam, yes, he is equally locked out of the American system in the same way that we are. However, Dave Davis made a choice he gave up his rights when he moved out of Minnesota or wherever he moved out of. You know, when he left there and became a citizen of Guam, registered to vote in Guam, became a part of our voting populace, right? He surrendered those rights. He basically gave them up and said, okay, I'm going to be here. But at any time, he can always, you know, go back. Where do we go back to? You know, if we decide, okay, well, this is not fair, where do we go back home when we're home? You know, it's a very fundamentally challenging issue in that way. And so when we look at the court rulings now, what we have to think about is how do we move forward, right? Is it over? It's as Dr. Underwood would, I love how he said it's not over like a million times in the back end of that presentation I was starting to get. It's clearly not over. We have a very clear history of never knowing when to quit. I mean, we've been at it for almost 500 years. It's probably because we're the oldest civilization in this part of the Pacific. It's probably because we have this, you know, this inability to give up what is rightfully ours. And so, how do we move forward from this court ruling? Well, there's a few different things that we could do. One, the judge pretty much gave us the blueprint for how to write a law. How do you write it? You know, what is it about your law that I didn't like that made me rule against it? I think we know what that is. A lot of it deals with the transmission of the results of the plebiscite to Congress, the president, and the UN. The judge said that because we are submitting those results, that they're going somewhere, that it is a vote that impacts the general public. And therefore, you know, we should let, you know, everyone who is a registered voter have access to it. However, you know, we know that fundamentally, this is really about recognition. This is about dignity. This is about respect. I mean, I know it's cliche, but when you've been disrespected for almost 500 years, you know, it's what else is left? We got to start somewhere. This is an acknowledgement that this is no accident, you know, that CHamoros are not the poorest, most incarcerated people, the people who suffer at the highest rates of non-communicable diseases. You know, we don't lead the charge in all of these great stats on accident. And that's where it has to begin for us. You know, we have to, you know, this is one of those steps that acknowledges it. Yes, it's important for status. Yes, it's important for decolonization, but it's also important for us, you know, for our identity, for our dignity, for our kids to feel like, you know, they're not just 2 pages in their history textbook, a footnote in the bigger picture of their education and how they see themselves within this world. You know, they're not just a dot on a map. And so I definitely don't think it's over. I definitely feel like there are still things that we can do here. We could write a new law. We could still move forward and still acknowledge and treat our people with dignity and respect. You know, personally, I wouldn't want to see us just say, well, let's just change everything. Let's just change all the things that made this law fail in the Ninth Circuit Court. And let's just do the switch, right? That was wrong, let's flip it around. I definitely don't think that that's the right idea. It needs to be a very thoughtful and deliberate process, a very strategic process. We have to look at it and ask ourselves, is it worth us just kind of taking a 180 on this? Because that's always historically, that's always the trap, right? Oh, we don't like that. You got to change this part. And then we're like, okay, well, what would you change it to? And then we have something that, gets us neck deep in a hole for the next 50 years. I don't think that that's a smart strategy. Okay, anyway, that's it for this. We can go on to the questions or the next one.
Well, I just I kind of wanted to get your thoughts on, because this question has been asked to me several times. And isn't it true that granting us U.S. citizenship already meant that we were decolonized? I mean,
no, not at all.
Who drew the line? And yeah, so what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that, Maga Hagen mentioned in her speech that, the Organic Act was a huge milestone for our people. But we got to remember that the Organic Act was not something that we chose. We have yet to self-determine. Self-determination means that we're going to make a choice. Those who will be governed, those who wish to govern themselves, we want to make a decision about what our government is going to be, what it's going to look like, how it's going to work. We want to pick that, okay? We want to lead that. That has never been offered to us. And keep in mind that was taken from us. We were here for thousands of years as a free civilization, a peaceful one. And that was taken from us by the Spanish when they decided that, they were going to expand their empire. And then there was a war fought between that colonizer and the United States. And we were literally a spoil of war. Like that's why we are a U.S. territory, is because the United States won that war. And that was part of the deal. And so, we went through this whole period under the Americans where, we were really kind of in this very politically ambiguous place. And yes, U.S. citizenship was a drastic improvement from that political ambiguity, but it still was not self-determination. We're still not equal. As a U.S. citizen, you're not equal. Remember the first time I read the territorial clause, it just blew my mind. It contradicted everything that I was taught in school. Everything I was taught in school was, premised on this idea that, with liberty and justice for all, one nation under God, indivisible. All of that just went out the window with the territorial clause. The territorial clause basically says that Congress, it's up to them to decide what rights do and don't apply.
These webinars can be accessed on Humanities Guåhan's Facebook page. To view the online magazine associated with Unincorporated Voting, Voices, and Visions Para Guåhan, visit humanitiesguåhan.org/unincorporated.
Hafa students, I'm Lieutenant Governor Josh Tenorio. For more than a year now, you all have continued to wash your hands and watch your distance from others, and you've done a really great job wearing your masks. We know your parents and guardians have helped you to make these changes to keep yourself and your community safe. As Governor Leon Guerrero said, we are happy you are here. We want you to continue to learn and sharpen your skills with the help of PBS University. This program is the result of a collaborative effort. We couldn't do it alone. I'd like to thank the teachers and support staff of the Guam Department of Education and PBS Guam for their work and their commitment to our students. I'd also like to thank you students for participating at home. To your parents, I'd like to thank you for taking an active role in your child's education. We are all eager to return to a time when all of us can share and study together in person. Until then, we hope you learned something new from this PBS University instruction.